Hey, Mr. P here. In this video, we're going to talk about the structure and function of hair as a piece of evidence. I think as you will see as we move through this chapter, there are a vast variety or a big variety of characteristics that hairs can demonstrate. I know at the surface, hairs often look the same, but when you actually look at them microscopically and you look at them forensically for pieces of information, they actually give you quite a bit of information that can both be class or individual evidence depending on the types of evidence that you get. So let's dive in. We're looking specifically at the structure and function of hair, and then we're going to follow this video up with another video in which we talk about the types of forensic tests and the bits of information that each of the tests can give a forensic investigator as they work on the analysis of a hair. So dive in, get started. So hairs can, like I said, provide class and individual evidence, but if we set the scene by talking about an investigator finding a naturally blonde hair, now I'm not talking about a dyed blonde hair, I'm talking about a naturally blonde hair at a crime scene, she thinks that it might help solve her case because of the fact that the individuals that were living in the house weren't blonde, the potential victim was blonde, and so a blonde hair was found, so the investigator is going to focus on it. What information can be gained from analysis of that hair is one of the first questions that investigator will ask herself. Okay, what piece of information can I get as an investigator from a hair that I just found at a crime scene? It may be completely irrelevant to the crime scene. It may be completely irrelevant to the victim. It may be incredibly irrelevant to the suspect. But what, if any, information can I gain from analyzing this particular hair, and what are the limitations of the information that the hair can provide? Okay, is it going to solve the case? Probably not. So there are limitations that need to be considered, but there is a wealth of information that can be provided by analyzing the hair. So the physical examination, that is the observations one can make about the physical structures of the hair. So, physical examination of the hair can yield class evidence. And we've talked in past chapters about what class evidence is. Remember, class evidence is the types of evidence that can lead an investigator to a specific group of individuals, like individuals that are blonde, or individuals that are black hair, or Caucasian skin tone, or African American skin tone. Okay, that's a type of class evidence because it groups the potential suspect or victim pool into a smaller class of individuals. Scientists could exclude people who have entirely African or Asian ancestry as producers of this particular naturally blonde hair because people of Asian and African descent don't normally have naturally blonde hair. Naturally blonde hair is one of the features of the Caucasian or the kind of Northern European ancestry. So, physical characteristics of the hair can offer clues to the predominant ancestry of an individual. Again, that is from the physical examination. We haven't dove into the chemical composition of the hair. We haven't looked at trace minerals or elements within the hair. We are just looking at physical examination, which are like the shape, the length, the thickness, the medullary index, the cuticle index, I mean, whatever. Physical examination. It was blonde, so we can rule out all people that are not naturally blonde. Nuclear DNA can also be provided from a hair sample, and so it could help provide individual evidence from the hair if the follicle is intact and the nuclear DNA could be retrieved. The only way that you get nuclear DNA, okay, DNA that is contained within the nucleus of a cell, is by analyzing the cells within the follicle, okay? And so individual evidence obviously is evidence that leads an investigator to an individual person. Now that's different than the class evidence, and I'm not going to harp on this because we've talked about it in previous videos. But class evidence, remember, is it groups a group of students, or it narrows it down to a group of students, remember, or a group of individuals. I'm going to say group. Individual is a specific person. So which one is better? Obviously the individual evidence is better, which is why DNA evidence can help solve a crime in a lot of cases, but class evidence can actually be beneficial as well. So mitochondrial DNA is another type of DNA that can actually be recovered from hair. And so mitochondrial DNA can be recovered if a portion of the follicle or the shaft is remained or has remained intact. This could provide familiar or family relationships, as mitochondrial DNA is inherited from the mother only. In biology class, you've probably learned what the mitochondria does, and one of the things that the mitochondria has that is unique in the sense that other organelles don't have it is that it contains its own DNA. Since the mitochondria as an organelle are inherited from the mother only the mitochondrial DNA from the mother is passed on to individuals. And so you might not be able to get nuclear DNA from a hair, but you can, in often cases, get the mitochondrial DNA, which isn't a piece of individual evidence per se, but it can give you family relationships, and it can show you that this individual as a victim or a suspect is related to other victims, which can help narrow down the suspect or the victim pool. Okay, and then gas chromatography can be a chemical test that can identify and quantify drugs, toxins, heavy metals, or even assess nutritional deficiencies. That's more of a form of like a chemical analysis of a hair, but it definitely can provide the information from a hair as the physical examination of the hair happens. Okay, so what is the function of a hair? So we know that all animals, or specifically all mammals, have hair. That's one of the characteristics of mammals. If you are a mammal, you have fur or hair. Humans don't have fur. We have hair. Okay, nobody really refers to their hair as fur unless it's incredibly dense and it covers the entirety of your body, which I don't think it does. But mammals have dense hair, which we refer to as fur. And so when you look at mammals within the animal world that live in the wild, okay, again, I'm not talking about humans, you will see that there is a density to their hair, and there is a sheer numbers to the quantity of hairs they have on their body, and so it is considered fur. But in humans' case, it's called hair. The purpose in either case, both hair and fur, is a couple of reasons. One, regulates body temperature. Okay, obviously dense fur can help keep you warm in colder environments, but it actually can also help keep you protected against damaging sunlight and UV exposure. And so you're probably wondering why an animal like a lion that lives in a really hot, arid location within Africa would have a body hair similar to what you see in this picture, and it obviously doesn't need it for warmth, but it needs it because there is intense and very damaging UV exposure to organisms that live in that environment, and so the hair actually provides protection against that. Hair actually can help decrease friction between the individual and its environment, so that it actually helps protect the skin from being torn or ripped, and acts as a sense organ as well, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if you want to do a little experiment as you're watching this video, okay, gently rub something against a hair on your arm or on your leg. You will actually, without touching your skin, feel or sense contact with that object just through your hair, because in the follicle there are sense receptors or sensory receptors that can help detect feeling or vibrations that move through that hair shaft. Again, one of the things that helps keep you safe within your environment. So, looking specifically at a hair and the internal anatomy of a hair, you will see that there actually is a muscle that is attached to every single hair shaft through the follicle, and each one of those little tiny muscles that are embedded within the skin layer actually helps to regulate whether or not the hair stands up or lays down. And so hair works as a temperature regulator with muscles in the skin that is called thermoregulation. You actually can tense and relax these muscles, which helps stand the hairs up or lay them down. If it is cold outside, okay, the muscles contract. These muscles in your skin layer contract, and they actually shorten. You'll notice that this one is longer than this one, so it gets fatter and wider because it's pulling the ends in. It's contracting, and that causes this hair shaft to stand straight up. That's what we call a goosebump. right? The goose bump is produced. It causes the hair shaft to stand straight up. It tenses this muscle, which essentially erects this hair, and that traps a heat layer within the hairs next to your skin. And so even if you don't have a very thick fur, essentially, or a very thick group of hairs, you still can trap heat because the hairs or the hair layer is now thicker. And so all of the heat that is being produced from your body can actually kind of be trapped within this little boundary that is kind of contained by the hairs. And it's this heat layer that is trapped that actually helps to keep you warm when it's cold outside. Okay, and so the opposite happens when the body is warm. And so these muscles relax, the hair becomes flattened. You can see that right here. Muscle relax, the hair flattens. It goes from being standing up to laying down, and it therefore releases this trapped air layer. Because when it's warm outside and you're hot, you don't need to trap the warm air layer, or otherwise you'll just keep overheating. Okay, so looking at the hair anatomy, again, we're looking specifically at hair structure. You will see that within the skin, okay, this is the skin layer, you have obviously the shaft, which is the part of the hair that is protruding from the skin, the visible section of the hair. You also have a hair root, and this hair root is seated firmly within the dermal papilla, but that's basically what we are referring to when we're referring to the hair follicle. Okay, now this follicle obviously still has this sebaceous gland. This is basically an oil gland, and that helps to kind of lubricate the hair as it removes or as it protrudes from the body. It also helps kind of seal up this gap. You also have nerve endings, which is why I said that you can actually sense your world around you through vibrations that are sent through the hair because of the fact that you have nerves. But you also have blood supply that helps to keep the follicle living so that it can continue to produce the hair that ultimately will help protect you. When you look specifically at the hair shaft, you'll notice three structures. The inside or most inside structure is called the medulla. That's basically the core of the hair. Then moving out from the medulla, you have the cortex, which is essentially kind of the bulk of the hair. And then you have the cuticle, which is just a very outside kind of protective covering of the hair. So, follicle. This is the club-shaped structure that you see down here that is made of the dermal papilla, the nerve, and blood vessels. It's basically the bulbous end that is seated within the skin tissue. It contains cells with DNA, along with a network of blood vessels and a supply of nutrients to feed the hair and help it grow. Again, if a hair is removed and it contains the cells within the follicle, then you can get DNA from it. If the hair shaft breaks off, or if it falls out but does not have the follicle attached, you cannot get DNA from it. Again, the hair shaft is essentially just protein, and so you can't get DNA from it. Secretes oil to help keep the hair conditioned, lubricated, that kind of thing. The hair shaft is composed of keratin. It's produced in the skin. Keratin is a protein. The cuticle, like I said before, is a transparent outer layer of the hair shaft. It's made of scales that overlap one another and protect the inner layers of the hair. Scales point from the end of the hair closest to the scalp to the end farthest from the scalp. So you can see that all of these scales, actually, and it's kind of hard to tell in this, you'll look in class through a microscope at hairs, and so I think it'll make more sense, but they kind of overlap this way, and it acts like shingles on a roof. And so if they continually overlap this way, from this being the scalp, okay, your head or the skin, and going out this way towards the end of the hair, they're overlapping this way, not back in towards the follicle. Cortex is the largest part of the hair shaft. In humans, contains most of the melanin granules. Melanin, remember, is the pigment. Okay, that's what actually gives your skin and hair its color. Medulla is the center of the hair shaft and can be a hollow tube. In some individuals, the medulla is absent, fragmented, segmented, continuous, or doubled. And again, you're going to look at pictures. You're going to look at microscopy labs while you're in the class, and so you're going to see hairs with a variety of different medullary indexes as well. Okay, one of the things that I like to use as an analogy as we're looking at the hair structure is through basically a normal pencil. The lead running through the core of the pencil would be analogous to the medulla. The wood, which makes up the bulk of the pencil, would be analogous to the cortex, and the paint or the covering on the outside of the wood would be analogous to the cuticle. Okay, just one thing that you can do to kind of help visualize the structure of the hair. So here are pictures that talks about the types of medulla in humans. Now in animals it is different, but in humans you will see these medullary types. The medulla, remember, is that core. It's basically the lead within a pencil. And so a continuous medulla or a continuous core would be a hair shaft that has a medulla that has no breaks in it. An interrupted medulla would almost look like it's continuous, but there are a few breaks. There's a break, here's a break, okay? And if it has a few breaks that interrupt the continuousness of the medulla, it's called an interrupted medulla. Fragmented is when you're going even more interrupted. Okay, notice that there is a lot of interruptions. There are a lot of breaks. Then it's a fragmented. Okay, there's few parts of the medulla visible. And then you have an absent medulla, which obviously when you look at the hair, there is no core. It would essentially look like a pencil with no lead, which is weird to think about in a pencil's case, but not in a hair's case. So you can see that when you look at through a microscope, you can look just at a physical examination of the medulla, which obviously will tell you a lot of information about the hair, which you can use to compare to individuals, both suspects and victims. So, one unbroken line of color in a continuous pigmented line unevenly spaced throughout the length of the shaft. In a fragmented medulla, interrupted would be line broken at regular intervals, but most of the medulla is intact. And then absent, like I said, no separate pigmentation in the medulla. All you see is just cortex continuous throughout the hair. So now that we've talked about the structure of hairs, the anatomy of the hairs, now we can kind of start looking at physical characteristics other than the actual anatomy of the hair. And most notably, one of the most recognizable characteristics of a hair is the color and texture or consistency maybe of the hair. And so we're talking about whether hairs are straight, curvy, or wavy, whether they are dark black hairs to brown to kind of medium blonde to the lightest blonde. But hairs can vary in a variety of ways, and some of the ways that hairs do differ is in shape, the length of the hair. Obviously people have different lengths of hair. Okay, if a victim has short hair, then obviously the hairs at a crime scene that are short are more indicative of, or more potentially indicative of, the victim's hairs. Diameter, okay, different ancestry populations have different thicknesses of hairs. Texture, obviously what hair texture, whether it's really, really curly, whether it's wavy, whether it's incredibly straight, and then obviously color. Also, the location of the hairs on the body or on an individual can differ. And so if we obviously look between two individuals, then the body hair in the same location, meaning if we looked at individual 1 and we looked at individual 2 that maybe have different ancestries, okay, have different hair colors, obviously the color is going to be different, the texture is going to be different, the diameter is going to be different, the length probably is going to be different, the color is going to be different, but that's to be expected. They're different people. When you look at the hairs on the same individual, meaning if I look at head hair versus eyebrow and eyelash hair versus beard or mustache hair of the same individual, I'm looking at 3 different locations of hairs on the same person, all on the same head. So we're talking about the specific area of the body is relatively similar. Okay, there isn't a big distance difference between the hair on your head, the hair in your eyebrows, and the hair of a beard or mustache. Okay, but all of those, all 3 locations differ substantially on what they actually look like. They might be the same color, but they are very different, and we will see that in a minute. Underarm hair obviously is very different from any other hair. Body hair, like your legs and arms, are different. Chest, back, that kind of thing. And then pubic hair can be very different as well. So, different hairs from different locations on the same person vary tremendously, not to mention those different hair locations on different people can vary even more. So, just remember, hairs can differ between individuals, but hairs can also differ in their locations based on the same individual. So, here are a variety of pictures that look at a variety of different hair locations. And so, hairs can vary among people, but hair also varies depending on location of the body. You can see that all of these particular hairs are different. And if we look at this particular picture, this is a pubic hair, and you know that it is because of the fact that pubic hairs often show buckling, which is kind of an abrupt change in the shaft of the hair. If you see a hair kind of abruptly change direction, or it looks like it's kinked, or it looks like it's bent, then it's most likely pubic hair. Head hair, typically uniform. You would not see the buckling that you do within the pubic hair. The medulla is typically pretty uniform. The medulla and the cortex all pretty uniform throughout the whole pretty uniform throughout the whole hair. Beard hair is usually coarse and may have double medulla. You can see that oftentimes when you look at a beard hair, there is usually two medullas that run kind of parallel to each other. And then body hair, like your legs and arms, typically have frayed ends, and that's just due to the friction that the hair is subjected to based on wearing clothes. So obviously the more you wear pants, the more you wear socks, the more you wear shirts, the more you wear underwear, whatever, typically frays the ends of these body hairs, and that isn't typically seen on head hair because the head hair doesn't typically see as much friction or as much abrasion as your other body hairs. Okay, so last thing we need to talk about is the cross section and hair shape. Now I've already talked about how different individuals can have different thicknesses of hair, they can have different hair shapes, but different locations on the same body, okay, different hair locations of the same individual can have different hair shapes in their cross sections as well. So head hairs are often circular or elliptical, and so when you look at head hairs, you will often see that they are round or elliptical based on whether they're straight or curly. Typically, straight hairs are more of your round varieties, and curly hairs are more of your elliptical hair shapes. Eyelashes and eyebrows often circular but taper quickly. So you'll see, because they are so short, they taper really quickly. So you'll notice from one end to the next, or from one end to the other end, there is a tapering, and it happens really fast. Why do your head hairs not taper like an eyelash does? Because eyelashes and eyebrows are of kind of a finite length, meaning your eyebrows and your eyelashes, especially eyelashes, grow to a certain length and kind of stop, whereas your head hairs continually grow forever. So you're not going to see the same tapering that you do in eyelashes on your head. Beard hairs tend to be really, really thick and triangular, and that's most of the time because of the fact that you are shaving, or because they are shaved off frequently. And so the hairs typically kind of tend to get more of this really thick triangular shape with double medulla. A lot of times you can see one medulla here and one medulla here, and it just depends on kind of how that hair kind of becomes shaped into that triangular pattern. Body hairs tend to be triangular or elliptical depending on whether the area has been regularly shaved. Again, if legs or arms are regularly shaved, then they kind of typically change in the shape that they become. They can actually kind of flatten out or become more triangular as they become shaved. But body hairs are typically a little more curly than maybe your head hairs are, and so again they are more elliptical or flattened. And then pubic hair tends to be oval or triangular as well. And so you can see that when you look at a variety of hair locations, you will see on the same individual a variety of hair shape within their cross sections. That's where we're going to end it. Bring your questions to class. Stay tuned for the next one. Bye.